Tracey Crouch, welcome to Acting Prime Minister, and thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I can see you're joining us from home today in your bedroom, I think. You won't mind me saying, it's fine. We all work from our bedrooms these days, every now and then. How are you enjoying lockdown 3.0?
Well, I try not to normally work from my bedroom, but there are builders outside. So unfortunately, this is the quietest place in the whole house at the moment. So I normally am propped up on the dining room table, which I think the rest of the world has suddenly discovered makes a great workspace. But it's fine. I think we've all become a little bit used to working from home and the restrictions that are in place. It's, don't particularly like it, but you just have to get on with it.
And before we make you Prime Minister, I just want to ask how you are, because you've been very open about your treatment for breast cancer. How's the treatment going at the moment? How are you?
I've been doing incredibly well, thank you. It's actually my last session of chemo later this week, so that part of the treatment process is open. It's over. I've been really lucky with the side effects. It hasn't all been plain sailing, but certainly it's not been as rough as I know some people go through with chemotherapy. And I've managed to still work throughout, but also for me, importantly, still had the energy to do some exercise and to stay cycling and stay fit and everything else. So it's not been completely plain sailing, but it's certainly not been as bad as others have suffered.
And what was it like being diagnosed during the pandemic? Can you sort of just talk us through what happened?
Well, I don't think the diagnosis during a pandemic is any different to the diagnosis any other time. It's still a bit of a shock to the system. But I think the difference is that you're not necessarily allowed to take people in with you. But the services are so great that there's an army of nurses there and support network around you to be able to help you answer any questions that you have while you're face to face with the consultant. I'm very lucky that the hospital trust that I live under is also the Kent Oncology Centre, so it's remained open throughout the pandemic. Treatment has continued for new patients and existing patients, and they've been very proud to say that they have managed to stick to all of their targets throughout the entire crisis, and I've been part of that process. I've learned a lot from the whole thing. I think in the past when MPs have spoken about cancer or breast cancer, raising awareness, we've done so on the back of written briefings from various organisations, and now having gone through the process, I can see a slightly different side and an enhanced aspect to it, and I don't want to be known as that MP that had cancer for the rest of my time in Parliament, but I certainly see that I have an opportunity to use my platform to not just raise awareness, but make some changes to some of the processes as well.
And you've been able to get your treatment, thankfully, but you are in Kent where case numbers are quite high. I mean, has it been an anxiety for you, and I guess for others as well, about whether treatments might be cancelled because of the strain the NHS is under?
They've been very, very committed to continuing cancer treatment in our area, and continue to remain committed. I think that they obviously recognise that there are different approaches in different parts of the country to this, but certainly my hospital is keen to continue both the surgical aspect and obviously the treatment parts of it, and I think that it's great that they're doing that. Perhaps they are lucky that they have a hospital infrastructure that allows them to segregate sort of parts of the hospital into cold and hot spots. That's not always the case in some of our older builds. I have to say the only time that I've started to become a bit more anxious about it is in the last week, where I suddenly felt very vulnerable to COVID, especially with the stories that we're hearing, with the statistics locally of ICUs and everything else. And at the age of 45, somebody who's still considered young and fit, I'm not used to being vulnerable. And I keep on having to remind myself that I'm not supposed to go out to the supermarket. And it's actually only when I get there and I'm doing my shopping that I suddenly think, oh my goodness, I'm not supposed to be out. But it is challenging. And I think people are suddenly getting a lot more worried about, especially this new strain of coronavirus.
And it's something that we all struggle with, trying to stay positive during this pandemic. You say about the bike, and I've seen you on Twitter getting on that bike, and I've got a bike at home too, so we share that interest. How have you managed to stay positive? Is it, clearly it's the bike, but what have you been kind of doing to keep yourself going?
I've been doing exercise both on the bike, but also walking outside. The other thing that I have is a 4-year-old, and it's very difficult to not be distracted by his just ongoing enthusiasm for everything. He brings a real sort of kind of reason to live, reason to stay positive to my own life and my other half's life, and so actually just keeping going, keeping smiling, keeping positive, and making sure that he's not scared and upset by what's happening. He doesn't really know any different, and actually, he's sort of kind of just one of these people that seems to take these things in his stride.
Well, that's great. And look, it's your last treatment this week, so what better way to celebrate than just becoming Prime Minister? Let's just make you Prime Minister. And
well, the irony is I'm delighted to be doing this podcast, but I would hate to be Prime Minister, and actually. I sort of kind of I find it a bit guilty when we have leadership elections, for Prime Minister, because I'm not sure I would wish Prime Minister on my worst enemy. I can't think of anything more ghastly than being Prime Minister. Not just now. I just at any time. I just think it would be hideous.
Well, you are going to be Prime Minister for the next few minutes, so let's get you settled into Downing Street. And firstly, what's the personal item you think you'd take from home into number 10?
Well, you mean other than my family?
Yeah, they're a given.
Other than my family, I would probably either take my bike or my golf clubs. I'm a beginner at golf, but actually it is something that I've really sort of enjoyed doing when we've been allowed to do it, and before my my diagnosis. It's a real opportunity sort of kind of for downtime. So I think I'd sort of kind of be the Dennis Thatcher of number 10 again.
Excellent. And what would be your ideal first dinner? So it's your first night in Downing Street. What is the kind of comfort food that you're going to want to either cook yourself, or, who knows, you might be able to order in, whatever you want, really?
To be honest with you, my comfort food is pie. I love chicken pie. It's sort of kind of the first meal I always have, after I've had my round of chemo, my appetite has returned. I spent a couple of days just eating toast, and then it's like, right, let's have chicken pie. But it would be, pie.
Nice. I love a pie. I'm obsessed with pastry generally at the moment. I don't know what it is about. Maybe it's January, lockdown, just anything with pastry right now is good comfort food. And who's the first person you think you'd pick up the phone to as Prime Minister?
Beyond, my family. I'd quite like to just ring up my sister and tell her that she now has to do everything I ask her to because I'm Prime Minister. I know what she would say in response, which is why I'm so normal, because she says it's now anyway. I don't know. I'd be really interested in talking to someone like Jacinda Ardern actually in New Zealand, and it's thinking about some of the things that she's done as a female leader, and getting some advice about how to stay strong, how to keep yourself sane, and not sort of take on the criticism too severely, which is one of the reasons why I wouldn't want to be Prime Minister, because I want people to like me. I'd probably talk to her.
Okay, great. And let's talk a bit about your path to power now. So you were born in Ashford in Kent, the daughter of a social worker and an insurance broker. You went to grammar school before studying law and politics at Hull University. And then after uni, you got straight into politics pretty quickly, working in Parliament for various MPs, later being Chief of Staff to several shadow cabinet members. And then you were elected yourself in 2010 as the MP for Chatham and Aylesford, and also appointed Sports Minister under Theresa May, later resigning from Theresa May's government quite famously. But let's start at the beginning first. How would you describe your childhood? Was it quite a political childhood?
No, completely the opposite. I mean, my family laughed because, really there was no politics and there was very little sport in my family. So how I ended up being, sports minister and an elected politician is something that people scratch their heads with. I don't really recall sort of kind of having lengthy political conversations at home. I don't really recall my mum going out to vote while we were growing up. It certainly wasn't an event that was, noticed as a kid. I think we watched the news. That's if I wasn't out playing on the streets. But, it was sort of kind of, it just wasn't a thing. I don't remember it at all. I think I became slightly more interested in politics in my teens, but again, in a really limited way. And it wasn't until I started studying A-level politics that I kind of really, I guess, started to sort of kind of recognise the political party system that we have, what an MP did and things like that, and paying more attention to current affairs. I was studying my A-levels.
Why politics then? What got you into it, do you think?
It was completely by accident. I wanted to do AS maths, and I couldn't do it if I wanted to do history, so I had to switch subject. So I switched subject to politics. It's completely accidental, and actually started to really enjoy it. I had good teachers, happened to be the same teachers as history teachers as well, so I had an excellent relationship with them. Things were interesting. Mrs. Thatcher just resigned, and John Major had taken over. The Maastricht Treaty was, sort of a live subject. This is indicating precisely how old I actually am. And the opposition was Kinnock and Ashdown, and that in itself was quite interesting. We had mock elections at school for the 1992 elections, I ran the campaign for the Conservative Party. It was, just one of those things, really, and then off I went to university. So it was completely accidental. But I have to say, these things often are in many respects.
True. How would you describe your politics then?
One Nation Tory. Although I think people do find it quite hard to put me into a particular box in the party. I have quite strong views on law and order, and I have quite strong views on sort of kind of economic issues. But from a social policy perspective, I'm very much a One Nation Conservative.
And to give an example of your politics then, you can do anything you like as Prime Minister, you can pass any law you want to pass. What would you do first, do you think? Is there something that you'd really like to just change?
It wouldn't necessarily require some legislation, but I'd really like to do more around wellbeing. I'd love to put wellbeing front and centre of what it is that we do. I'd like to see us have a wellbeing budget, which is what many countries are now doing. So it's not just about GDP that drives forward how we take an approach to the economy. It is looking at putting social policy issues front and centre of budgets. I genuinely believe that sport and physical activity and mental well-being change everything, and actually should be part of what we do on a daily basis.
Okay, well, as Prime Minister, you can't just set your own agenda, of course. You're beholden to events, and as you mentioned earlier, we are in the middle of a pandemic. It's a pretty tough time to be Prime Minister. So firstly, there's going to be a reshuffle this year, we expect. So if you were Prime Minister now, how would you kind of refresh the cabinet? Is there someone, who do you think should go from the cabinet at the moment?
Well, I think that's really unkind. I'm not going to do that to my colleagues.
Oh, I thought I might be able to tempt you.
No, not at all. Oh, yeah, I think X, Y, Z should be axed. That's not going to happen.
Oh, let's turn it around. Let's make it nicer. Who do you think deserves a promotion? Who do you think is really great?
People like Kemi, I think, have really shown sort of kind of amazing competence, both at the dispatch box and with their portfolio. And I suspect that she will be promoted.
This is Kemi Badenoch, by the way, the
Kemi,
minister.
Kemi Badenoch. She's absolutely excellent. She's a relatively new MP as well. Quite often it's worrying to see new MPs sort of kind of get onto the ladder so quickly and climb up, because you do think, have they missed out on some of the parliamentary aspects of what being an MP is about? But she is so brilliant that I would love to see her in cabinet.
Do you think Boris Johnson needs a bit of a reshuffle to reboot his premiership at the moment?
Not right now. I mean, I think there are challenges. Ministers are, facing significant challenges at the moment, and I think the historic decision-making context is something that is really important. Even those who are under pressure, under fire, I think still, need to be able to continue to do what they are actually doing at the moment because of that historical context.
I suppose for him, the question is how he refreshes himself, though. I mean, do you worry about the way this pandemic is knocked lumps out of his kind of political capital? And, do you wonder whether he's even able to take you into the next election?
No, I don't worry, in part because one of the advantages actually of working from home at the moment is we're not in a Westminster bubble. And actually the only people that I ever hear criticism about Boris Johnson from are sort of kind of fellow Westminster kind of ites, if you like. That includes the media, by the way. But actually, on many occasions I've been sat in oncology, having my infusion of chemo, and people, whether it's the nurses or fellow patients, are saying, I think he's doing a good job under the circumstances. That there is a great deal of sympathy for the decisions that he has had to take in very difficult circumstances. Nobody expected this to happen. Nobody could have predicted the course of what has happened. I don't think that, in March last year, when this started, came onto the horizon, in the seriousness that it had, obviously it was slightly earlier than that, we started talking about coronavirus, but I don't think we ever thought it was going to be the, quotes, war, end of quotes, that we thought it was going to be. I think people may have thought it was going to be over sooner. And I think people are understanding of that and of the difficult decisions the Prime Minister's had to take. And I think we all benefit from hindsight in those decisions. And I think any public inquiry that will look into this, and I'm pretty sure that there will be one, will also understand that decisions were taken at a time with evidence given at that particular time by experts, and for valid reasons. And I think that's that will come across.
And one of the really difficult decisions that's pretty prescient right now is around schools. And I'm in a school today, which is why the sound might be slightly echoey for those listening. I'm in a classroom at the moment. Schools are sort of saying they feel oversubscribed. There are too many pupils in. So as Prime Minister, do you think you'd put a cap on the number of pupils going into school at the moment?
No, I don't think so. I think it's for each school to have that conversation with its parents, and schools have taken different approaches across my own constituency in that sense. Some schools have allowed children of one critical worker to come in. Some schools have been very strict and said two critical workers, both parents. And I think it's important that schools know what their capacity is and they have the flexibility to decide for themselves. I do recognise that actually schools have been put under pressure by a lot of parents who want their children to go to school, either because they think it's the best place for them to be in terms of learning, or they can't do their own jobs from home. And I do sympathise with that.
What do you think should replace exams this year? Because that's still a live issue as well. Ofqual are supposed to come up with some kind of solution this week.
I think teacher assessment will end up being sort of kind of the primary part of that. And I think that's probably the right way forward. Certainly last year I had long conversations with senior leaders across my constituency about teacher assessment, and they were explaining to me the sort of kind of triple level processes that they put in place to make sure that the children are being given the most accurate grades according to their work done to date and everything else. So I don't fall into the camp that thinks that there will be mass sort of kind of grade inflation. I genuinely trust the teaching profession to look at the work, look at the students, look at the capabilities, understand how they perhaps would have performed in exams, and give them the best grade in accordance to that.
Do you think Gavin Williamson has turned out to be a great talent in the cabinet?
I'm not going to comment on that. The one thing I will say is I'm a bit sad about the relationship between government and the unions. It does seem to have completely broken down. I am somebody who does think that our teaching unions are really important, and they do reflect concerns of teachers, and I would like to see a much better relationship with central government, whoever that is, and the teaching unions.
And let's move on to sport, because you love it. I literally know nothing about it, so you're on firm ground here. But as a qualified football coach yourself, do you think the rest of the football season should maybe be called off now? Because loads of games are being postponed anyway. Some people say, is it fair for football to continue when things like schools are mostly closed? What do you think?
No, I don't think it should be called off, although we are talking about the top flight of football. A lot of football has and will finish, unfortunately, and actually we shouldn't underestimate the importance of non-league grassroots football in our communities. It's something that football clubs themselves, like Chatham Town, wouldn't make a mention in a national newspaper, but actually they've been at the heart of the community throughout the pandemic, supporting older fans that they know are vulnerable and isolated, and are really slap bang in the middle of their community. You saw that last night with Marine, and every time that there was a helicopter shot of the club, you could see it was sort of in the middle of rows of terrace houses, and that is actually what football is about. It is there; it's a central point of communities. Top flight football is obviously significantly different, and I do think it is important that it continues. I read somewhere over the weekend someone saying that it should continue because it's important to the nation's mental health, and I think there's an element of truth in that. I think people people who are fans, obviously, Paul, I'm not talking about you, do actually want to see sport on their TV. And it is 90 minutes, of just watching something and being distracted from all our other woes that we currently have.
Yeah, it's a good bit of escapism, and then say I can understand that, and I've been known to watch the odd sports match myself.
Sports match, therein lies.
I sound like such an aficionado.
You like my mum calling Facebook the Facebook. This is the equivalent of you talking about sport.
Okay, let's move on quickly. I'm drowning here. And look, lastly, because we haven't got much time left on this podcast, let's just do a quick fire round. Donald Trump's been banned from Twitter. Who should be banned next?
No, I don't know. I'm coming off Twitter myself, actually. I find Twitter's become a sort of kind of not particularly useful form of communication. It keeps me up to date with what's going on in American football and in football here and things like that, but it's become a bit of a cesspit.
Do you genuinely feel like that? Because I'd imagine, when you're going through treatment for cancer, you probably reprioritise life a bit. And do you think maybe we all spend a bit too much time on social media when it's probably not doing that much good for us, is it?
I just find that Twitter in particular has become quite a negative place to be. With Facebook, obviously you can limit your interactions. I use Instagram a lot more. It's a lot nicer environment to post, and I don't necessarily post lots of political stuff on Instagram anyway. Facebook I use as an important tool of communication with my constituents, and it has actually been really helpful to have social media and be able to update people on where their vaccination centres are and things like that. But Twitter I have found increasingly negative, and I think there's a couple of more things that I want to do on Twitter myself, particularly around the raising awareness for breast cancer. But beyond that, I'm thinking of coming off it.
Okay, that's interesting. Next question: what song would you dance to at party conference?
Never. I'm not a bad dancer, but I still wouldn't do my moves in public. I think sometimes there's just something you just don't do that. And I'm also getting to that age where I am going to look like a mum dancer. I'm just like, no, I'm not doing that. I could do keepy uppies at conference, but I'm not doing I'm not dancing.
That is an excellent replacement. I was going to ask if you got a sort of favourite song or a favourite band.
I have really eclectic taste actually in music, and I actually have a playlist on Spotify where people can see the sheer sort of kind of differences in some of my music. But I'm always told off when the Travelling Wilburys come onto my playlist, because I do like to give a good croon to a bit of the Travelling Wilburys, and even my 4-year-old now tells me to shush.
And look, when we can all return to going abroad again or travelling around the UK a bit more, where would you go on holiday as Prime Minister, do you think?
Oh, well, I'm actually really looking forward to going back down to Cornwall. The other half's Cornish, father-in-law's down there. Looking forward to sort of kind of, giving Grandma and Granddad Cornwall a big hug. But actually, the other thing, I along with the bike, I'm really keen to get out and do some cycling and do some well-being trips. I'm kind of really focusing now on looking after myself, and both physically and mentally, balancing off some of life stresses with exercise. So maybe a nice trip to some of the more flatter parts of France on the bike.
Sounds lovely. And what would your Downing Street pet be?
Well, we have 2 cats. I'm pretty sure that they would want to come with us to Downing Street and be pampered by everybody. But I'm not sure they like the attention so much. But yeah, I'm afraid cats. I'm not a dog person. I don't want to go and pick up poo. I've passed that stage in my life.
And lastly, I always ask people this, but I think you've been pretty definitive already. I mean, would you ever want to be Prime Minister under any circumstances whatsoever? No, unless people are going to like me. Basically, I just don't want to be disliked, and it always ends in tears. Oh, I can understand that. I'm a little bit too thin-skinned for it myself, I think. But look, Tracey Crouch, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Good luck with the rest of your treatment, and thanks again.
Thank you for having me.